Hello and welcome to yet another episode of LLMix. Today we have a very special guest, Prashant Khanna, or PK as he's popularly known, the head of production for sports and live events for the entire JioStar suite. Prashant, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, we've been talking about doing this for a while, and I'm glad that I finally showed up.
It's a genuine pleasure to have you, and I know that today we're going to be diving deep into sport and the absolute, legendary work that JioStar does for the IPL. So I'm really, really excited about this. But first, let's just bust a couple of myths, Prashant. What are some of the most popular myths that people have around the IPL and how it's produced? I'd love to know that.
Well, it's interesting, right? Everybody knows it's the biggest sporting event in the country. We believe that it's a socio-cultural phenomena in some way, and it's an event that actually is the only event where India plays and wins every day. So it's quite exciting for us in that sense, and because of the size and scale of the event, I think this big myth that you know we actually throw the kitchen sink at it, which is it requires massive armies of people. Uh, it requires large scale production units to come together. Is something that's probably not always true. There is the way we go about. For to give you an example, there is only that much real estate available in the stadium. You cannot have when you're looking at the scale of 12, 13 languages, or to produce for an event, 25 plus feeds, that go out to different cohorts. The only way that you can look at producing some of this stuff is through, remote production, through looking at tools that allow you to have fewer people on site, the capability of bringing in commentators, talent from different locations at the same time, and then um, the ability to make sure that fans can never really tell that difference. So I think one big myth for us is that it doesn't require, the scale and size. It requires more ambition and intent, and then to figure out, how do you turn it around.
So could you unpack remote production a little bit for some of the non-broadcast folks? What does that mean, really?
I mean, very interesting. Remote, as we've heard it, is always been in another sense, which is you're remote from those locations, or you're at a remote locations, which means you're not in the main place. For us, we started out exactly with what I mentioned earlier, from figuring out how do we make sure that we are able to scale and reach out every single possible audience cohort that we could think of, and putting the consumer first in that journey. Uh, how do you make sure that your uh, ambition is scaling to the point that you wanted to deliver? And that with that came in remote production. The idea was very simple. The idea was, how can every single stadium be connected, in India? If I were to speak of IPL, where we started remote production as early as 2018, so this is 7 or 8 years ago. We are still seeing in international markets uh, bits and pieces of it in some form. But for us, it was, can we avoid having our talent and crew lost in a flight or traveling from one location to the other over a certain number of hours? How do you make sure that they're consistently available to be able to produce more content, have freedom and flexibility to be able to go and spend time with their families, without being away from them? And equally big metric of saying, how do we help reduce the carbon credits in terms of flight, travel, or hotels for that matter, in some way? And all of this was actually a big plus to say, let's create one central hub that's connecting all our stadiums to us. Can we bring back those camera feeds, the replays, the graphics? Can all of it happen from one location rather than it being distributed? And that allowed us to actually very quickly scale from 2 to 4 to 8 to 10 to 12 different languages by being in one central location. And that meant what you see on your screen as a commentator potentially sitting at the ground is actually sitting in our studios with the same backdrop that you see them have on ground with a television screen in front of them, and using the cameras that we are providing them to be as close to being on the ground as possible and yet give a perfect visual and an auditory experience to our audiences.
So could you unpack a little, like what kind of camera gear do you guys travel with? A typical IPL game, like the final, for example. How many cameras would you have in stadium? What kind of bandwidth would you have backhauling back to your production center? Just some numbers would be great.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the first piece, obviously, we are service providers from a world feed perspective to the BCCI. So, they take control of the larger world feed production, which is approximately between 35 to 37 cameras. These are, of course, all 4K cameras. In fact, IPL is the only cricket tournament that is natively captured in 4K and then turn around onto the platform. We have 10 gig connectivity across all our stadiums. We bring back close to about 20 plus camera feeds on those, connected to those venues, back to us. And additionally, interesting enough, we also don't just look at standard cameras, but there are specialized cameras as well, whether it is replay cameras that are, effectively multiple phases to bring back on a specific camera, looking at how data comes back to us, whether it's ball speed or Hawkeye, and elements thereof. And additionally, graphics, so is it clean camera feeds that we can then sit on and add language commentary, graphics, and customization in terms of an output, is what the larger infrastructure looks like. So it's 1+1 connectivity. You have a backup for in form of a satellite as well, in case fiber connectivity falls through in some way. And we have some really, really fantastic and efficient technology teams that support our production ambitions internally, where we go to them and say, uh, this is where the ask is originating from a content ambition perspective. How do we put a production design in place and then reach out to the technology teams that allow us to then add, these elements of the scale of fiber, the number of feeds that should actually come back, what are the nuanced elements that need to be, part of it? How do you build for redundancies over and above that? This is an A grade tournament. You can't necessarily, there is a serious obligation on missing a ball from, it not being shown on broadcast. So you can imagine when that happens for 25 plus feeds at the same time, it's like, orchestra, which is quite mind-boggling.
Yeah, and another myth that I suppose people, at least maybe in the US or Europe, may have is that the assumption probably is English is probably the dominant feed for the IPL. Would that be the case, or that's not the case?
Yeah, very interesting. Till I think 2013, 14, we always had English as the predominant language of broadcast. What's really interesting now is that we have today, uh, JioStar broadcasts an IPL event in 12 different languages, out of which English only contributes to 10%. So it's actually Hindi now that is, a 60, 70% audience base, and the remaining goes to our regional languages. What is really interesting fact also is that a lot of our international syndicate partners are seeing more growth on the Hindi and regional feeds in international markets than real English. So, whether it's the Indian diaspora there or, audiences that are consuming, it's becoming more and more prominent that the fantastic jobs that our content teams do in curating these feeds, we have audiences and partners that are reaching out to say, English is fine, but we really want Hindi or Tamil or, some of the other languages to come back to us.
Wow, it's cool. Now, you've just been through you just come out unscathed out of this big merger between two giants, like Jio and then Hotstar. So, can you unpack a little? How hard was it to actually put the IPL together? I know you have a packed calendar anyway this year, but how hard was it? How challenging was it to do the whole thing?
Well, I mean, I am probably a speck in that team in terms of, scale and output when the two came together. Post merger between of TWDC and RIL, which is, which went on to form JioStar. We had all of 4 months, for the biggest IPL season. And I'll share some numbers with you as we go along in terms of the scale and reach. But you can imagine it as buying two Formula One teams together and getting them to race over the weekend, as one was just phenomenal. I think it's a interesting structure. It was not just on platform, but it was off platform as well, which meant that getting two separate production crews, getting two separate content teams, getting two separate platforms, all to come together to finally give an output for a event of the scale of IPL. And that's the biggest event that we do, in our calendar by far. So, if you ask me in hindsight now, it was a fantastic challenge that the organization posted to us, us collectively. But uh, the scale was just I mean, I can just think of some top line numbers. We had 20 plus control rooms, 20 plus studios, that were working simultaneously. We had this, we spoke about the 10 gig 4K fiber connectivity across stadiums that we were looking at. And this was the first time where, apart from the fact that the organization came together, our digital and linear ambitions still remained separate, which means we were producing separate shows for digital and separate for linear. And at the
Wow.
same time, the match coverage was independent for those. So everything that Star did independently and Geo Cinema did previously, JioStar did combine more out of that at the end of the when the merger came through.
Wow, wow. Well, if you can just maybe dive a little into the scale of the like the streams and the platform engineering. I know you have some numbers, so it'd be great if you could flash those and then
Sure.
take us through those. Yeah. I suppose you'd be second now to the NFL. Would that be right in saying NFL is probably the? I could be wrong there, but would that be accurate in terms of the streaming scale?
I think NFL actually is quite, and this is a public platform, so I think the numbers are quite different. Uh, I think NFL's last reported scale, and of course, I think that was Super Bowl and the number of games that
Yeah.
they do throughout. The aggregated number is quite interesting. I mean, Super Bowl saw 126 million. IPL in that window over 2.5 months sees some staggering numbers. So I'll share those with you. I mean, if you look at the scale here, 1.19 billion reach across TV and digital. That's more than the entire population of US, Canada, and Europe combined. 15 years, if you were to see, the network has been able to grow the property year on year, and which is quite phenomenal. um, 652 million on digital, uh, just linear and digital numbers in terms of, reach during the final was 189 million on TV, 237 million on digital alone. If you combine that, that's close to about 420 odd. NFL Super Bowl saw 120 million, in terms of the the numbers that showed up. So this is just quite, you know, the scale itself is, and hence it becomes very difficult when we are speaking to partners, in terms of engagement. You can never really do any tests for identifying the levels of concurrency that shows up, here, for instance. How do you test for 60 million people to show up at the same time watching the same piece of content? I don't know of a platform that has the capability of doing a dry run in that capacity or scale.
I've heard stories about when Dhoni was playing that, when Dhoni would, at the time Dhoni would get out, suddenly you would have like a lot of traffic just leave the website, or the app, and come back the moment he comes back to field or something next. So that kind of volatility is quite crazy to deal with for your engineering teams.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I think it is, I think they're just so ahead of anticipating this and testing it and planning. And it's like it's like how marketing teams would plan for a marketing campaign, sales would plan for what they would do. I mean, the tech team is actually the most nimble in that sense to keep and identify those peaks and turfs, which are absolutely dynamic. You can't really plan for it. A dot ball is much more valuable and it attracts a bigger audience than a six being hit because it's at that critical juncture. It's just quite phenomenal.
And just like in live news, if anything can go wrong, it can probably go wrong.
Absolutely.
Okay, now a sport is all about fans, right? So So how do you guys measure fan engagement? Like, what's your go-to metric? And what in the past, what's worked for you with your fan engagement, and what is just absolutely like kind of like not never worked at all? You just unpack that for us, please.
So what's interesting is I think from a perspective of metric, we always keep the fan front and center. For us, that is, I would say, the holy grail, that we're in the service of the fan. How do we make sure that they are the ones who are actually dictating what we are doing, instead of us building something and then throwing it out to them, or sharing it with the audience to scale. And that has really allowed us to look at how uh, platform innovation is built, how production is done, how are we looking at elements that are very key to uh, the strategy around the whole experience for a specific event. And that again flows down from the biggest event, which is the IPL, for instance, where we have seen what really excites fans more and more, at least on a digital experience, is the fact that they're able to interact with it. They're able to touch and feel it firsthand, as an engagement, model. Very different ways of experiencing it on a connected TV, for instance, or passively on linear. So how do you define to program the same stream depending on the way or place where it is consumed? And you know one of the biggest upsides that we saw was how are people natively consuming content today. A lot of the content is consumed vertically, and hence we actually went back to the drawing board and designed a feed which was consumption of a live cricket game vertically in a 9 by 16 format, which for the last 150 years was being produced horizontally. So we went ground up to not just to look at, it was not about resizing a screen. It was about capturing a game from ground up with different cameras, looking at how does a graphics information appear on a screen that is so small, what is really relevant, what is not relevant at that moment, how do you effectively utilize a screen in a split which allows you to see a live and a replay moment at the same time. um, was something that was actually eye-opening for us. We never really, uh, you know, today MaxView has an adoption of 30%. I think it is one of the biggest innovations that a live sporting platform has seen, or a way of producing a sport a different way has possibly seen, where it's not a replacement, it's actually become a complementary experience to how you're watching on a horizontal screen. And what's really interesting is that Maxio has become more one-to-one and intimate experience. It makes you feel like your biggest superstar is actually performing for you, versus seeing it on a horizontal screen, which is more a one-to-many. You see the audiences at the backdrop, you see many more players. This is just a very, very intimate and interesting experience in that sense. So sometimes it's by try, you try it out and you figure out, with immediate audience feedback. We live in a glass bowl, like news, for instance. By the end of the match, what your report card is looking like. How are your fans reacting to uh, the interactivity that you're offering them, to the features that you're offering them. We're seeing multicam have a very interesting uptake. The fact that you can go to a separate camera yet follow your game. We see a lot of uptake on social interactions. We do a lot of gamification at the same time, which um, so it's not one size fits all. The idea is always to say, how do I make sure that we are all able to experience the game the way we would ideally want to. We are obviously scratching the surface at this point in time, but yeah, that's what's
And
really
has there
exciting
been
for us.
and has there been anything that you've tried? Experimentation is powerful, of course, but you've tried but hasn't really worked at all. Where you felt, okay, this is a great fan feature and this should really work, but it's just kind of bombed. Anything in your experience where it's not really worked out?
Yeah, I mean, the two top that come to our mind, I think everybody jumped on the metaverse bandwagon just post the pandemic, right? Everybody believed that experiences could be lived virtually. You could have people interacting in their avatars, and And I think we actually streamed the first World Cup cricket match in the metaverse live, and in 2021, and it just didn't take off. I think one big factor was scale. I think second, human experiences we realized were far more important, especially in a live sporting environment where it is, that connection is more with the sport than actually with the individual per se, and that was very physical, or wanted had to be physical. The other was the whole 360 piece. We've seen it come out so many times. Whether it's headsets, whether it is, we produced 38 games of IPL 2018 in VR. Kabaddi was produced in VR in 2016, even before, cricket tournament. That is almost 9 years ago. And we still continue to do it. We still continue to offer it on the platform. But we've realized that it has never really taken mass adoption because of how expensive the headsets are. It's not very easy to consume for longer periods of time. So while we still are in the service of a fan, and even if we believe that there is one fan out there who wants to consume it in that sense, we are offering it on the platform today. But that is something that we believe genuinely needs a rethink in terms of how can it serve a much wider and mass audience in some form.
Okay, okay, Prashant, I know that we're running out of time, so I have two more things to cover with you. One is we were talking about hyper-personalization, and what for you is the holy grail. So if you could just unpack that a little, like how holy can the holy grail actually be? Let us know.
I think it can be, it can be as holy as each fan wants it to be, and it's our responsibility as custodian of sport and people who are in the business to make sure we are serving each of those fans. We have a 4I metric that we evaluated with, which is inclusive, immersive, intuitive, and interactive. And I think if you're able to solve for all four of these, that's the ultimate holy grail. Inclusive means irrespective of where you're coming from, how you experience the sport, can we actually provide it on the platform? JioStar was the first to provide sign language with descriptive commentary on the platform for all matches of IPL, this year. It has never happened before for a live sport, and consistently across the platform. It brought in audiences to be able to experience the best way they could. Interactivity is something that's extremely important, for us today, whether it is social experiences, whether it is gamification, whether it is the ability to be able to uh, swipe moments. To give you an example, the vertical feed today gives you the option of a swipe left. You are able to see all camera angles. Swipe up, and you can go to key moments real time. We are building swipe left, which can give you graphics, and swipe down, which can change your commentary, in some form. And that allows for that's how you natively experience all your apps today, or all your platforms today. And immersive, can we actually bring you into the game in some form, that allows you to experience it firsthand. And if we can get to a point where the next IPL game can be watched by every single viewer who showed up in the language that he wants to see, the graphics that he wants to see, the commentary that he wants to listen to it or not. Have subtitles, for instance, in the size that they prefer, the language that they prefer, and possibly having the option of saying, I probably only want to watch four players and not 11, at any given point in time. Customize the game the way I want to, and that I believe would be the ultimate holy grail. As somebody who's as a team that is in the service of fans.
And you mentioned immersive and you mentioned graphics. So could you unpack a little how you integrated Motu Patlu as a programming thing into this? We could share something around that, and as well as how your anchors now have data on their iPads and they can actually show fans real time analytics as they go along. That'd be really nice to know.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is, and I will, I think we probably didn't, cover this in the myths that you brought up, and I'll share my screen to show you, an example of uh, what we built in terms of, our IP characters, that we could actually take it to a cohort. So again, this is in the service of the fans, and it
Yeah.
starts from the fact that not every innovation requires you to throw money at it, or even if it's at scale, it's actually intent. It's about sweating every dollar. It's about making sure that you're doing it for a specific reason, that it's not just gimmicky but serving an audience. And that's where the team actually came together to look at two or three key elements that allowed us to really scale at this IPL. For instance, we looked at some of the international solutions where live mocap characters were brought to life, and we realized that they were cost prohibitive. We said, can we go
Yeah.
back into the lab? Can we sit down and build this ground up? What you see here today in terms of the screen, we actually brought alive the Motu Patlu character real time in mocap suits, the same suits that were used for filming of the avatar, at a fraction of the cost. And integrate it with live commentary and make it meaningful for a younger audience, in some way, that they could engage with. And that's what allowed us to really go deeper into the cohorts of saying, we want to catch this audience young, we want to let them grow with the sport, as it moves forward. But rather than you know picking them up and bringing them to the sport, can we actually take the sport to them, and in the language that they would understand? I mean, another example that I can share with you is integration with our partners. For the team, it's been really important on how we can bring in value to our, whether it's our advertisers, whether it's our sponsors. And we actually sat down. If you can see here, we actually sat down with the Apple team, and both on the content side and on the production side, on identifying and saying, let it not just be a brand or logo integration. We actually went back and built an app with them where we could do analytics using the Apple iPad and the pencil. And, whether it was moving off, players around the field of play, or whether it was looking at analysis, that allowed us to make sure that they actually got a lot more value out of the partnership than necessarily just a vanilla sponsor integration in some form. And then, contrary to what I was saying earlier, it comes down from when you sit down and look at simple principles of saying how to not do something, it gives you the opportunity of defining what you can do really well. So, from COVID, we realized that we never wanted to bring any of our presenters ever in a Zoom call again. Like you and I are speaking today. Can we actually bring them in flesh and blood, on in a manner that our consumers don't necessarily have to experience it in a way that it is substandard? And with that intent in mind, I'll just show you a quick screenshot of something that we tried and have used ever since. Is this virtual transportation, teleportation, sorry. Very simple, green screen. We've all used it for you know as long as we've been in this
Decades.
business. Yeah,
Yeah.
possibly. But if you can see here, we actually brought Steve Smith from Sydney into the studio, and we made the entire eye level look in a manner that he appeared in the space physically. We had seven talent. You couldn't tell whether he was there or not. And what's really interesting is all our talent that watched him in the studio actually walked up looking for him in the production facility. They believed that he had actually come down from Australia, to be with us on the opening day of IPL. It actually broke. It was trending on Twitter as number one on that day. Uh, a very, very simple intent of saying, rather than bringing somebody on screen, can we actually bring all our talent, irrespective of the geography that they are in, by simply framing them in the right manner and showing them in the studio, and having them interact with the teams.
And this is your Pixotope partnership, is this? Is this the one with that?
So what's really interesting is we with the merger, we actually brought in independent tech, and had we were spoiled for choices. So our earlier partnership was with Unreal, and we built everything on uh, with Epic Games and Unreal, and we built everything on zero density. And when we came in, we had Pixotope available to us as well. And what we realized was that uh, it could work really well depending on the kind of integration that we were doing. So everything that we were doing a lot more with front end graphics, we used it with Pixotope. Everything that had larger virtual set integrations, we use that with zero density.
Got it. Understood. Okay, now I think we're coming to the end of our conversation. So it's been really an enthralling one, but there's one last thing that I have to talk to you before you leave, which is agentic AI. Now, I know we were talking about it earlier, and you're saying that you've already started deploying agents for personalization and highlight generation. So if you could just unpack that a little and let us know where you're going with that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So we've been, we've always believed that, some form of, if I were to not just stick to agentic, possibly just give an example of, what you look as automation in terms of machine learning, AI, and then, taking a step further. Uh, we've started looking at highlights production. So today, apart from key moments that show up on the live game, we are actually able to spit out a language specific highlights within the 3 minutes of the game getting over. And the best part is because it's contextual and rule based. To give you an example, if an IPL game, the first 20 overs, 200 runs were scored, and the next innings was supposed to finish within 5 overs, the highlights while spitting out will automatically contextualize itself and give you an output of the first innings, more of the first innings in those 20 minutes and less of the second innings put together. It also captures for nuances like key players. So every time a Virat smiles or does a action, it will show up, in the highlights in some way. So it also captures a lot of emotional moments in the game, which is really exciting. And we've been able to build it over a period of time with the data and the information that has been available to us. We've been very lucky to have an in-house data partner, which is Cricinfo. That's part of our. Um, so how to mine that data, how to make sure that that data is spit out in the right manner, whether it's in terms of graphic deployment, whether it is predictive graphics. So as the game progresses and what could be recommended as an output or an option, or whether it comes down to elements, that are more production friendly in nature. Now, to give you an example, we realized that we had some great talent like the Steve Smiths, who's a genius of breaking down the game, but our Hindi, Tamil, and Telugu and regional audiences could never understand or experience what he's bringing to the table. So we said, why don't we look at actually taking his nuanced output as the slang that he would speak in the delivery of his tone and still translate that message into multiple languages. And we were really successful in building it over a period of time where today we are able to use language agents that allow us to be able to translate it. Yes, we can't do it real time, and that's a holy grail for us to get to. Choose can we actually give you commentary in 28 plus different languages, for you to simply pick up and say, I want to hear it in my language. It could be uh, uh, not a specific person's point of view, but at least explain to me in the way that I want to hear it. And so we've started with a lot of non-live stuff that has been fantastic and quite interesting for us. People absolutely break down when they listen to a Stuart Broad or a Steve Smith starting to talk in Gujarati or in Marathi, for instance. But it's been really fantastic, to be able to share their knowledge and wisdom with audiences that was not possible before.
Well, Prashant, thanks so much for all these insights, and it's been an enthralling conversation with you. Thank you so much for this chat.
No, thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope the insights were interesting enough, and I look forward to engaging again soon.
Great. Have a great IBC.
Thank you so much.